Hey, welcome everyone to another edition of Let's Talk About. And today, really excited to be chatting with Mohammed Faradi because we're going to be talking about how to negotiate IT vendor contracts like a pro. So, welcome to the show, Mohammed.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Yeah, it's a common topic. I'm often asked questions around this. I often go through it myself when working with IT vendors, and lots of emotion involved, lots of things to deal with, to go through. So, what I'd like to do is let's structure the call around how do we set up for negotiations, how we prepare, get ready, how we
Mhm.
then work, the strategies during the call, and then we'll just round out on some common pitfalls. But before
Okay.
we do that, maybe just give us a quick background on yourself, Mohammed, in terms of your experience around contracts, because I know you've got some awesome experience to share.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the first thing I should say is that I probably have no business negotiating contracts. By trade, I'm an airplane mechanic. That's what
Okay.
I that's what I went to school for. But as in life, whatever twists and turns come, you kind of go with them. So many years ago, over 25 years ago, I landed in a procurement role, procurement help desk, and just kind of moved up in different roles. And I ended up as a director of procurement about 13 years ago.
Hmm.
And I was in the corporate space and I decided, I was spending all of my time managing teams and I was having to hire consultants to come in and do the stuff that I enjoy doing, which is negotiating.
Right.
So about 13 years ago, I said, I think this is what I want to do full
So you,
time.
so you enjoy negotiation? Because I know a lot of people don't like negotiation. So you actually like that?
Yeah, it's
Okay.
yeah. I've been told to seek help for that. Um,
Yes.
but I enjoy it. As a kid, I used to play chess a lot, and for me,
Okay.
negotiations, it is like a chess match, right? You're constantly thinking of moves, you're planning, you're strategizing, and you have to you have to be able to enjoy the challenge of a negotiation to be successful at it.
Hmm.
Because if you go into a negotiation and you're miserable, you're going to have a tough time getting a successful deal done because all you're thinking is, I just want to get this over and done with so I
Hmm.
can go do something else.
Yeah. And
So,
and building on that as well, what I've learned over my career of working IT projects for the last 25 years is I used to go in with I'm going to win. I'm going to screw them down as much as possible. I'm going to get the best deal I can. It's all about us versus them. I've got to win, and learned the hard way that it's not about that. It's about how do we work out a good agreement, because if you set it up wrong in the first place, it's just going to create a lot of problems later on in the project.
that's an excellent point. And that's something I will talk about this idea of this myth of a win-win negotiation
Hmm.
because I hear that term all the time, and it's non-existent. Like, for example, I grew up playing sports. I played a lot of organized sports. In high school, I played football, rugby, basketball, hockey. Never once in the locker room did the coach ever come up to us say, "Okay, guys, let's give it 110%. Go out there, and if we do well, we're going to win the game, and hopefully the other side's going to do well, and they're going to win the game too."
Right.
Right?
Okay.
There's no win-win because anytime you imply that you're trying to win something, then it means the other side has to lose. And if you think about it from a psychological perspective, you're going in there thinking, well, I need to win, which means the other side needs to lose. You project that in a negotiation, guess what they're going to think? Oh, well,
Mm.
I can't lose. I'm going to try to win, which means you're going to lose.
Yeah.
So there's a different approach, and we'll talk about that in the negotiating strategy, like
Yeah.
a
That'd be
better
awesome to cover
approach.
that as well, because
Yeah,
that's a common misconception, like you say, for
yeah,
sure. So
yeah.
sorry. Yeah, I interrupted. I wanted to pick up that
No,
point, but yeah, keep going on
no
I
worries.
love it.
So yeah. So last 13 years, I've had my own consulting firm. In kind of that middle period, I also came up with a software application, a contract management tool. I put a team together. We developed that, and then early last year, I sold that part of the business and kind of got back to my first love, which is negotiation. But
Negotiation. Yeah.
also over the last 3 years, particularly during the pandemic, I did actually developed a negotiation training course,
Hmm.
which I've been delivering globally to clients, and that's really become popular. Um, especially this year with what we're seeing in the tech industry and with the economy, it's it's interesting because tech vendors have become very aggressive now in their negotiation stance.
Oh, well, since the pandemic.
Well, no, since this whole economic downturn earlier this year, with all the
Oh,
layoffs and
oh,
the big tech
recently,
firms,
okay.
because they still have the same quotas, they still have the same goals, they have less resources, less funding, so they're becoming more aggressive. But what I tell my clients and students who go in the course is, well, it also presents a very unique leverage opportunity for negotiators, right?
Hmm.
We have to get out of this mindset that we're beholden to the suppliers. As customers, they need us more than we need them. And in a negotiation, that should be part of your strategy when you're setting it up, is kind of determining, and we'll talk about BATNA exercise. That's where that comes in.
Yeah, I'd love to get into BATNA, the best alternative to negotiated agreements. That BATNA acronym
Mm-hmm.
is fascinating. But the just before we do that, let's actually start with that whole how you set up for the negotiation, how you prepare, how you make sure your ducks in a row and come in
Yeah.
with the right attitude as well. And I do want to talk about just build on that point because whenever I've sometimes come into IT projects when I'm either rescuing a project or being asked to deliver a new technology for a client, and they've already selected the solution, they've already selected the technology, and sometimes it's not an option because it's either an upgrade or it's the only technology solution available. So I wanted to circle back on the fact that the vendor needs us more than we need them, but sometimes I've seen situations where the client feels like they're in that they need the vendor. So let just explore that a bit more for me.
Yeah. It's so the way I like to approach it, and I've often gone into situations, that very situation where, the customer is saying, look, we need this vendor. And here
Hmm.
are all the reasons that why we need this vendor. Basically, what you're saying is, and going back to the BATNA exercise, the best alternative to negotiated agreement, you have a very weak BATNA. You have no alternative. You
Hmm.
have to get a deal done with the supplier. And what we need to do as negotiators is improve our BATNA. There's ways to
Okay.
improve it. But before we do that, the first question I like to ask when I'm asked to come in and help with the negotiation is, I'm not so much interested in what technology are you looking for or what your technical requirements are. Obviously, in a technology deal, technical requirements are one of the most important things. But
Hmm.
what I want to know is, what's the business problem we're trying to solve
Exactly.
with this technology? Let's forget the requirements for a second. What is the pain point that we're trying to resolve? And
Hmm.
then we go into the BATNA exercise, right? And in the BATNA exercise, then I start asking questions, looking for options like, okay, fine, we need the technology to solve this business problem. Question one, what happens if we can't solve this business problem? Right? Like, what's the impact to the business? How critical is the impact to the business? Do we shut down? Is it going to become painful? Does it impact our customers? These things are important to know. Question number two, have we considered building it or solving this problem ourselves versus going
Hmm.
out and getting a vendor? Maybe it's not ideal. Maybe it's super expensive, but is it an option? This is where we're creating leverage. So the way I think of it is, okay, if we're talking to a supplier and the supplier says it's going to cost $1 million for our solution, it's $1 million. Now I'm going to ask the question, have you considered building it yourself?
Hmm.
Have you thought about what that cost could be? If that number is anywhere near $1 million, you've just improved your BATNA because you've given yourself another option now. You may
Yes.
not exercise the option, but you've got something in your pocket. And that's
So the bat.
something.
So just to put it in a different perspective, it's the banner is your backstop. It's your alternative if you can't reach the deal you want.
It's your worst case scenario.
Worst case
A-
scenario. Okay.
And so what I'm trying to do is figure out, okay, best case scenario, we go with the supplier, they give it to us for
Hmm.
the price we want, it meets all of our requirements, and it's delivered on time. Best
Hmm.
case scenario. What's the worst case scenario? Worst case scenario, we have to build it ourselves. Well, if the cost to build it ourselves is around what the supplier's quoting right now, that's a pretty good BATNA, because now I can go back to the supplier and say, well, why would I pay you $1 million? I could probably spend that much, maybe a little bit more, and solve the problem myself, but now I own the whole solution. Now you've created leverage with the supplier. Supplier's thinking, oh, I could lose this deal.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's a worst case scenario for the vendor, not for you as a client, because you don't want to go to a worst case scenario of building it yourself. But for the vendor, it's a worst case because they're not getting the deal, right?
Yeah. So actually, what I'll do is the BATNA is for us. So our worst case, our best alternative, if we can't get a deal done, is we build it ourselves, or we lose some customers, or it impacts our bottom line. That's our worst case scenario. That's our BATNA. Then I want to try to figure out their BATNA. And this is where a lot of negotiators, they miss that step. They just worry about theirs, but I want to know what's going on with the supplier. Okay, this supplier, how big are they in the market that we're in? Is market share important to them? How have they been doing? If it's a publicly traded company, it's really easy to find out what was their last earnings report? How are they doing this quarter, this year? What are their shareholders saying? How big is this deal in their funnel? Are they an existing vendor? Can we pull some levers saying, look, if we don't get a good deal here, then maybe we'll stop using your other products. Can they pull some other levers, like raise our price on something if we don't? Those are all things that we need to figure out. So we figure out our BATNA, but we also want to try to figure out their BATNA. And the BATNA exercise is not something you do once and then you put it away.
No.
Like you have to constantly in the negotiations keep going back to it and saying, okay, I thought we were a small fish in there, but after conversations, it seems like this is a pretty big deal for them. Let's go redo our BATNA. Our BATNA just got a lot better, right?
So, I mean, it's a great point about existing relationships as well. So, for example, when I've worked with existing vendors, we've had a great relationship, provide awesome service. I've actually had the discussion going into the negotiation saying, cards on the table, here are options. This is what we'd like, but we're also looking at this with you. And then I've had the discussion with them to say, okay, what are your options as well? What's your best case? What's your BATNA as well? And sometimes there is that opportunity to have that honest discussion with them. You never know 100% if you're getting everything truthful, but I've often had good relationships where we feel it's in a good place and we can have that honest, open conversation.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. It doesn't hurt to ask at some point in the negotiation, and you have to figure out when's the right moment to ask it. But say, look, what do you guys need? To make this look like a good deal for you, right? And this is where we'll talk about negotiating strategy. This is the collaborative negotiation approach, and there's actually 4 steps to it, and that is one of the steps. But just going back to the preparation, one of the other key things. So the first thing I want to know is what's the business problem we're trying to solve. The other thing is right up front, I want to identify who's the team that's going to be in part of the negotiation, right?
Yes.
The last thing you want is to go down the road of a negotiation and then somebody comes out of the organizational woodwork and suddenly inserts themselves into your negotiation. That happened to me once, and it was absolutely disastrous.
Yes.
And that's when I learned. This was almost 18, 19 years ago. And I still remember the incident like it was yesterday, because like it was, ingrained in my memory. Like I'm never going to fall into that trap again. So I was negotiating a deal for a client, and the CIO, I knew that, he was kind of overseeing this deal, but I thought we're going to do the deal and then we'll just let him know the deal's done. And so I wasn't doing a good job. First of all, I didn't sit with him and say, okay, this is the strategy. This is what we're going to do. I just kind of said, yep, I'm negotiating. And every once in a while, I'd say, yeah, negotiations are going well. They're not going well. The vendor's being tough. So one day I'm walking to the conference room where the vendor's waiting for me. And the CIO sticks his head out of his office because, Mohammed, how's that negotiation going? I was like, yeah, it's pretty good. I'm actually going to see the supplier right now. We're still hung up on a couple of points, but we're getting there. And he walks out and he goes, all right, I'm coming with you. Like, oh, you don't have to. Like, no, I'm going to come with you. And while we're walking, I still remember he said, listen, Mohammed, I heard you went and you played a round of golf with these guys. I'm like, yeah, when I played golf. He goes, listen, you're probably thinking you're all buddy with these guys, but you need to be firm with them. When we go in there, I want you to look them in the eye, no smiling, backslaps, or handshakes. And you tell them exactly what we want. Tell them we're not happy and we're not leaving until they give us what we need. I'm thinking, okay, well, that's not the approach that I wanted to take, but he's the client's the CIO. Like, what am I going to say? Okay. We walk into the room and John, this is exactly what happened. The suppliers are smart. They've done their homework.
Yeah.
We walked in. The supplier looked at the CIO and goes, hey, Phil, heard you just picked up a new Maserati. How's the ride, man? Phil melted.
Straight away.
Big smile on his face. He basically agreed to everything that they were proposing in 20 minutes and then took the sales guy out for a ride in the car. Collapsed my whole negotiation.
But everyone feels like but they felt like it got a good deal though.
They did, but I knew
could be better.
There was so much on the table. And so that's where I learned my lesson. So I said, you know what, from now on, I need to know who's involved. The decision maker, the internal client, legal, finance, IT, info security, HR, whoever. And I'm going to sit with them and I'm going to say, okay, this is the strategy we're going to use. And again, what I like to use is, I'm kind of blending into it, is two-table negotiation. I don't know if you're familiar with this term, but suppliers use it all the time.
Yeah, I've not heard of it actually.
Yeah, so have you ever been in a supplier negotiation where the decision maker for that supplier was in the meeting, at least early on, where they could turn to somebody in the meeting on the supplier side and the person would say, yep, I approve this deal, let's go.
Done, yes.
It never happens. It's always, well, we need to go back and get approval. We need to go to our deal desk. We need to go to, that's two-table negotiation. If you imagine it, there's a table in the middle of the room.
Very common in car dealerships. When you're negotiating the price, I've got to go to the manager to.
So example I give in my training course, I tell them I'm actually not allowed to go to the dealership with my wife. I'm infatuated with cars. I love cars. And my problem is I'll see a car, and as good a negotiator as I am in the corporate space, in a dealership, I see something, I'm like, all right, I want it. And so when the dealer says, hey, are you ready to buy? If my wife's standing next to me, I can't say, well, I need to go talk to my wife. She's right there.
Yeah.
Two-table negotiation. So the front table is where the negotiators sit, and we horse trade on price and term and everything. And the back table, hidden away, is your team, which includes the decision makers, includes lawyers, includes IT. And so what I like to do is I'll be negotiating and I will bring people from my back table to the front table for a very specific reason. And then they'll leave again. So I was negotiating a deal with one of the big software companies. If I mentioned, you know exactly who they are. We were doing a renewal, and the supplier, I was asking for a discount. The supplier just wouldn't give me. So we got on a call, and I brought the CFO from my client onto the call. It was the two suppliers. We get on the call, and the first thing I did was I asked for this discount. And I knew it was a big ask, right? The supplier said, well, you know, what you're asking for, we can't give you because really your client, they're just not big enough for that level of a discount. And as soon as he said that, the CFO jumped in, real angry. So, what do you mean we're not big enough? This is exactly how big we are. These are all the acquisitions we're going to do this year. These are all of our customers, blah, blah, blah. And then he hung up, like he left the call. Awkward silence. We talked a bit more, got the deal. I was talking to that sales rep. This was several years ago. I was talking to the sales rep last year, and we were talking about that. And I said to him, I said, did you really think that that was some random occurrence? Because what do you mean? I said, I spoke to that CFO for 20 minutes before the call. I told him, look, we're going to get on the call. I'm going to get these guys to say that you're not big enough for the deal.
Right.
And then this is how I want you to respond. This is the attitude I want you to give, and then hang up. Don't stick around on the call. And then I'll take it from there.
Yeah.
That's two-table negotiation. Suppliers do it all the time.
Yeah.
For negotiators, yeah.
And just to break that down as well, because when you're talking about having the right people in the room, so this table, they might literally be in the same room, but off the call, or they might be nearby, so you can bring them in as needed, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've done that where we're in the room and they're sitting there and they're just not talking. And then if I need to ask something, I'll just go on mute and
Hmm.
then we'll discuss and then I'll go off mute. Um, Again, this is a strategy. Technology vendors use it all the time.
Yeah.
Negotiators have to get into the habit of strategizing in that manner as well.
Yeah, it's almost like the rule, I think, is at least twice as much time spent planning than you do actually in the call. It's that preparation time, right?
Yeah,
Same with
yeah,
speaking events as well. You're spending 5 to 10 times the amount of time for the actual event.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And this only works if the last point on preparation is if you're communicating
Mm.
often with your back table.
Yep.
You have to let your team know what's going on. Too many times I've seen negotiators get into the silo of negotiation and they don't tell anyone what's going on. And what happens, a couple of things happen. So somebody might then interject themselves into your negotiation because they're like, oh, I don't know what's going on. More often than not, the suppliers, well, what do they do when it's a tough negotiation? They try to go around the
Mm.
negotiator and they start calling everybody in the company to see if they can talk to somebody. And
Right.
if you haven't been keeping everyone up to speed on what's going on, it could derail your negotiation because they could pick up the phone, call somebody, and they say, "What? Is that what Mohammed said?" No, no, no. We're completely fine with what you're proposing. So you have to communicate. Those are the three things: identify your team, do the BATNA exercise, and communicate.
Yep.
That's key to preparation in a technology negotiation.
Yeah, and one level of detail on that as well is when you're getting the people ready for your table, your second table, and in the room to make sure you can talk to the deal in the whole amount, is actually coming up with scenarios about spend amounts. Because I've often had the right person in the room, the buyer, but their authority, we exceeded their authority during the negotiation. We didn't expect to. So I'm often talking around, okay, we're expecting around the 500 to a million on the contract. But if it goes to 1.5, who do we involve and are they available and ready? Because you don't want to be then going, okay, well, we've got to stop the call and then come back to get that extra approval. If for whatever reason you're adding more services and adding more to the contract, which pushes it above that original amount.
Yeah. So one of the things that I like to do in the negotiation before we get into the actual contract, I like to work on a term sheet.
Yes.
So on the term sheet, I want to put like what are the big items that we're going to be negotiating. And what I want to establish on our side is what I like to call the threshold of acceptability.
Mm.
So for example, for a legal term, rather than me having to keep going back to legal and saying, hey, is this okay? Is this okay? I'll go to legal first and say, okay, for IP indemnity, I'll give them context. Like, look, this is the solution. Here's the problem it's solving. This is the type of data that's going to be exposed. This is what's going to happen. I know this is our standard for IP infringement. How much are we willing to move on this, or how
Yes.
firm are we on it?
Love
Once
it.
I know that, in the negotiation, obviously, I'm going to start at, the bare minimum, what everything for us, nothing for them. And now I know I've got room to negotiate up to that threshold. I can still say that, well, look, this is our standard, what you're asking for. I mean, I can go back and ask. I don't know if they're going to give it to me, even though in my mind, I already know that we're going to get it because I've established that threshold.
Yep.
But now what I can do is now I can trade that for something else that I want in the contract.
Yeah, I
So
love
then
it.
I can say, well, I can go back and ask for more here. But if I do that, I want something over here, better discount, better terms, more features, whatever the situation calls for. Because in my mind, I already know I'm going to be able to give them what they're asking for. And maybe I can get something else for it. Right?
Yeah, love it.
That's the
And then,
strategy.
yeah, I like that as well. And then the other, what I've used as well myself is going into these contracts negotiations is coming up with options, asking the vendor for different options and scenarios. Sometimes it's called the MISO, which is multiple equivalent service offers. So they're saying, okay, here's option one, which is what you wanted. But then here's option two, which is maybe slightly less licenses, but we're going to give you some extra modules. And then option 3 is maybe more modules of a different area, or maybe a trial of some a free trial with the other modules and less licenses. So there's different options that they can come up with as well. But then to your point, making sure you have the full range of decision makers for every single option going into it as well.
Yeah, it's a great point you bring up about options. So when we start talking about negotiating strategy, as I mentioned, win-win to me, it doesn't register. It's win-lose, right? Which usually ends up being lose-lose. So there's another form of negotiation called a collaborative negotiating strategy. And the collaborative negotiating strategy has 4 steps to it.
Right? Oh, okay, yeah. So let's break. I love frameworks and steps. Yeah. So let's break this down.
So this is like it's 2 modules in my it's the 2 main modules in my training course. This is the crux, the meat of it, right? So in a collaborative negotiation, the first phase is preparation. And in the preparation phase, those are the things where you're identifying your team, you're doing your BATNA exercise, you're trying to improve your BATNA exercise. That's preparation. And then you have the value creation phase. Now you're sitting with the supplier and you're not just taking a look at the pie and seeing how can we slice it up and who gets what. Well, how can we make the pie bigger? What are the different options we can add, right? Yep. And this is where you can really start thinking out of the box, depending on the size and scope of the deal. Is there an opportunity to do maybe some JV opportunity to do some research and development? Would the supplier be interested in doing like a joint press release? Is the deal big enough that, is market share important for them? Is there any, type of training or test product that we can use? Can we become a test customer? All of these things. So we're creating value. The third phase is now you've created all this value and you've created options. So we say always try to keep 2 to 3 options in play. The third phase is now value distribution. So now we start distributing the pie. Who gets what in the deal, right? And in the value distribution, this is where it's important to start building trust, particularly with the new supplier. Right. I'm a consultant. I know you do consulting work as well. My biggest fear when I take on a new customer who I don't know is when I send them that invoice, is it going to get paid? Is it going to get paid on time?
Right.
A simple thing that a negotiator can do to establish trust with the supplier, and I'll do this often, is I'll just, in the negotiation or through an email, I'll say, and listen, once the deal's signed, make sure you copy me when you send your first invoice, and I'll make sure that it gets through the right channels. Just even saying that, it's incredible how much trust that establishes with you and the supplier. Yep. They open up, right? And now they get that sense that, okay, this is actually a collaboration. This isn't just somebody trying to, beat me down on price and just get the best deal possible. So, So you have preparation, value creation, value distribution, and then the last piece is the follow through. This is where you sit down and you write the contract. This is where everything you've discussed gets put into paper. And this is where you deal with the uncertainties, right? Lots of uncertainty in a deal. And this is where SLAs are important. This is where
terminology.
Escrow provisions are important if it's any type of custom code or development work that's being done. And this is where you make sure that anything the supplier said, if they passed over some collateral that had all these features and functionality, all of that goes into the contract. Even at times I've said, oh, and by the way, that product sheet you shared with us, we're going to make that Appendix A to the contract.
Yeah.
Oh, what do you mean? That's not an appendix. I'm like, all right, well, tell me what on here isn't part of your solution, because that's how you advertised it.
Right? Yeah. And it gets really detailed as well, because I've had it where I've had to define defect, because we had that the vendor would fix defects during warranty for no cost, because they should, it's a defect. But what we found is that during the test cycles, we were finding defects, but because it wasn't after go live, they were charging time and materials to fix the defects because it wasn't after go live, it was pre-go live. So although it was a fixed price contract, their definition of defect was after go live, not during the test phases. So we ended up renegotiating. Unfortunately, we had a really good relationship, so we could work something out.
Yeah.
But lesson learned for that is be very, very clear on what terms mean. Don't assume you think you know what it is. Let's just write it out. Be very clear at what in this case, when a defect occurs and who fixes it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would take it a step further. You can use that very terminology, those definitions, to benefit you in your contract. One of the challenges most customers have with technology vendors is and renewal time, when the price goes up.
Yeah.
Right. And so my starting position always in a negotiation is we're not going to pay any increases on renewal, zero. I want the supplier to tell me exactly why they think we should pay for an annual increase. Supplier will always give two answers, and it's always the same two answers, and they're always in this order. The first answer is, oh, well, the extra money that we're charging you for, we're going to put that into product development to enhance the product. We're going to make the solution better for you, and it's going to benefit you. They
and
always
everyone
say
else.
And the response to that, and again, if you've done your homework and got the definition right, it's like, well, the definition of maintenance in my contract is, patches, fixes, updates, upgrades, new versions, new releases. So all of the maintenance dollars that I'm paying you and all of your other customers are paying you, we're not on the phone with you 365 days a year. So we're still paying you the maintenance. That's what that money is being used for, is for your R&D to improve the product. So why do I have to pay you more on top of that?
Yeah.
The second then they'll go to is, well, actually, it's because of inflation.
I was going to say inflation. Always
That's the second one, right?
Yeah.
And when they say that, I'm like, okay, you know what? Totally makes sense. But guess what? We are as impacted by inflation as you are. So why is it my responsibility to cover your inflationary costs? You're not doing anything for me.
Yeah.
So again, explain to me why we have to pay an annual increase. And most of the time, you don't.
No.
And I have it on good authority. I've talked to a lot of software companies. That annual increase is just pure revenue.
Yeah.
It's a revenue line. It doesn't go into anything but revenue. So shouldn't have to pay for it. But it comes back to when you're negotiating your contract, that last phase, right? When you're writing out the contract, definitions are really important.
Yes.
You need to put this stuff into it.
Yeah. And the other one is the named team who's going to actually do the work or be your point contacts as well, because everyone brings their A game for negotiation of people and the A team.
Yes.
And I get that, because there are specific teams involved in the sales versus delivery, but meeting the delivery team is very important to know that you can get on with them, work with them, and understand how you're going to work together collaboratively. And swapping out resources it happens. I get it, because vendors, people move on, people resign. It's sometimes unavoidable. It can be managed and reduced for sure, but sometimes it's unavoidable. So I always include a clause in the contracts, which is that we'll be given at least a week's notice of any transition of resources. And also the transition knowledge transfer is also at no cost to us, because I'm not paying for the fact that, unfortunately, one of your staff is leaving, because it's always going to impact the project, because there's a time ramp up of knowledge, but it's not my problem. It's something we'll work together on it, but I need you to take accountability for it.
Yeah, absolutely. When the supplier's team is critical to the success of the go live, then right at the negotiation stage, put their names into the contract. Yeah. These are the people that are going to be, and then, like you said, put language around it to say, should one of those people decide to leave, first of all, you have to tell us why they're leaving. It can't be that you're moving them to another project.
No,
that's bait and switch, right? So you have to give us a legitimate reason, and we need a time, and they have to meet these requirements. You can't bring in a resource that's less than the one that's leaving.
Exactly, right? Same or better,
Yeah, and depending on how critical it is, you can even have some penalties put in there to say that if this starts to impact our project, then you're going to give us like service credits or something to really make it painful for them to pull a resource. Otherwise, why wouldn't they?
Right? Yeah. And structuring the contract in terms of delivery as well. I'm a big fan of phases. I think they're very important, and with break clauses as well. I mean, I've never had to enact a break clause, because it's typically you're too far down the delivery. Yeah. But I've also negotiated a contract where it makes it easy to fix bad-ish situations. But
Yeah.
you never know. Sometimes an issue might come up that you just cannot resolve, and you do need that break clause. And then, but tying it to phase delivery. So by this, maybe it's a date or this set of deliverables, that's when you get payment, not based on a 3 months in, we give you the first payment. It's like, no. At the end of this phase of work with these deliverables, I give you payment, assuming they're accepted.
Yeah. So in any deal that I work on that has deliverables that are going to be coming through in phases, I break it down into the phases. Each phase, I tell the supplier, well, let's clearly identify what's the deliverable. Even if it's the first phase is we're just going to have some meetings and put together a project plan. Well, okay, then the meeting notes and the project plan are the deliverable.
Yes.
There's acceptance criteria. So I like to have acceptance definition in the main contract, because you don't want to have to rewrite it in every statement of work going forward. But acceptance criteria, so whatever you give us, we have a period of time and we want to clearly define how we accept the deliverable. And then the payments, each deliverable is a milestone, and the milestone is tied to a payment. And the payment gets triggered when the milestone is accepted. So now you've tied everything together, so they can invoice all they want. The invoice isn't getting paid until we get the deliverable and we've gone through the acceptance process and we've accepted the deliverable. And that's what keeps the supplier honest in these larger deals.
And what's just on the acceptance, what really gets my goat is when you see standard contract terms where it's a 24-hour acceptance period, and if you don't reply, it's deemed accepted. So one 24 hours is just, anyone who's worked in any company ever knows that trying to get approval for something in 24 hours is very, very difficult. So I always push that to at least 5 days.
Yeah.
And then secondly, you have to confirm, as in it's non-response is not acceptance. Yeah. So it's just being very clear on that so you don't get caught out as well.
Yeah, I mean, that language, and this is where, legal really comes into play, but most negotiators should know how to write, especially procurement folks should know how to write a good acceptance clause. But you add language, you're right, I start at 2 weeks for any type of acceptance. If there's any testing involved, then that period could be longer. And it's always the customer is going to decide if it's accepted. And we're going to give that in writing, and then you have a period to remedy if it's not accepted. And you get a certain number of tries, and if you can't fix it, then there's something else happens, right? Maybe there's a termination provision that kicks in at that point. You have to hold the supplier's feet to the fire. I've seen stuff where they'll say, well, an invoice will come through and say, well, if you pay this invoice, it's deemed accepted. Well, no, absolutely not. If you have good language in the contract. But I've seen it where clients didn't have anything in their contract. Supplier sent an invoice, they paid the invoice, and the supplier's like, we're done. Like, well, no, but we're still doing testing. He goes, yeah, but you paid the invoice. And if you read the fine print at the bottom of the invoice, it says you paid the invoice, so it's accepted.
Yeah. And again, these are call shout outs to vendors out there as well. Is please work with us on this stuff. We don't want to have these challenges on our projects and our contract negotiations.
Yeah, absolutely.
And sending invoices in as well. The amount of vendors I've worked with where I've seen one where the invoice came in 6 months later after the project closed, and it just caused a massive amount of pain for the company afterwards. And it's just please just help us with the invoicing. At least keep us posted that it's coming if you are going to be delayed. I get the problems happen, but it should be an invoice within a month of delivery at least.
Yeah. And these are all things that in that final phase of the collaborative negotiation, when you're writing the contract, anything you can think of, you want to discuss it and put it into the contract. Even things like you have to issue your invoice by this period of time. And if you don't, your invoice isn't going to get paid. Force them to issue an invoice, right?
Yeah.
So these are all things that can be worked out, but that's part of the collaborative negotiating strategy. You're not trying to beat up a supplier or take advantage of them, but you really want to collaborate with them and figure out what is the best deal that is acceptable to both sides, and it's successful. Something that I can go back to my side and say, look, this is the deal we put together, and my back table is going to go, yeah, that's a good deal. We're happy with the deal, and it should be the same for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know about you as well. I just wanted to start to pivot to the pitfalls and the
Mhm.
lessons learned, because one of the ones that springs to mind is keeping the conversation constructive as well. So I've been on both sides as a technology seller, vendor with Big Four, but I've also been on a client side receiving and negotiating contracts, or been in the room for delivering on the technology as well. And one of the ones that comes up is where someone on the team, be it on the client side or the vendor team, just starts to get a bit angry and narky and just not constructive, which is really frustrating, because you have all the prep meetings, you say this is how it's
Yeah.
going to go, and then for whatever reason they decide that this is how I'm going to project in the room. And I've had to pause the work, pause the meetings, and say, okay, folks, we need a time out here. We just need to break. We need to just reset and have
Yeah.
an honest conversation with them to say, look, this is not constructive. Really want you in the room because you have value to add, but you need to come across, and here's what you're doing to the deal, which is not constructive. So yeah, that's one of my pitfalls to watch out for, is don't let that drag on at all. As soon as there's non-constructive behavior, is jump on it
Yeah.
immediately.
Believe it or not, that's actually a move that some negotiators use.
Try anyway.
Most of them use it incorrectly. They
Hmm.
just think that sitting in a room being angry and banging your fist on the table is going to somehow,
Beat you in submission.
exactly. But the first time I saw that move, um, I was working for Citibank in New York. I was
Hmm.
very junior. I was just kind of getting my feet wet, learning about negotiation, and I worked for the guy I reported into was the SVP there, Ted, who's a dear friend of mine. He's retired now, but we still keep in touch, and he taught me such an important lesson. We went into a meeting. A supplier was coming in for uh, renegotiating a renewal, I think it was, and I was only there to just take notes and kind of hold the door open for people. I was very junior. So Ted asked me to come in. We sit down. Supplier comes in. It was the two sales exec and the president of the company was on speakerphone.
Hmm.
Ted comes in, puts his notepad down. He's just staring at the supplier. Doesn't say anything. Doesn't even say hello. So
Okay.
the supplier, a little awkward, and then the supplier starts talking, and he's like, "Ted, we're really happy to be here. We've been doing work for Citibank for this many years. We think it's a good relationship. We've done this, we've done that." He starts kind of going through all of the greatest hits of everything they've done,
Hmm.
and Ted doesn't say a word, just listening. The guy's talking and talking and talking. Afterwards, he's quiet, and Ted goes, "Are you done?" He goes, "Yeah." And Ted goes, he goes, "I think you're full of crap. Your product sucks. Your customer service sucks. You're this, you're that." And he starts listing grievances. And some of it, even I'm going, wow, he's getting like really personal with this guy, like
Right.
attacking him, right? So that guy did what any of us would do in that situation. You defend yourself, right?
Yeah.
So he said, so Ted's going on. He goes, "Ted, I have to disagree with you. I don't think what you're saying is really fair." As soon as he said that, Ted slammed his fist on the table so hard, I jumped out of my chair. And he screamed, like screamed across the table at this guy. He goes, "Why is it that when you were talking, I sat and listened to you quietly, respectfully, but the minute I start speaking, you interrupt me and I'm not allowed to finish my thought? Am I
Wow.
am I not as good?" And pin drop silence. And then after what seemed like an eternity, the president of the company on the speakerphone goes, "Ted, we're very sorry. Please continue. We won't interrupt you." And then Ted opens up his notebook and he goes, "I want this, I want this, I want this." He listed all the things he wanted. He goes, "Mohammed will show you out." And he leaves. And he said, "And Mohammed, show them out and then come to my office."
Hmm.
So after I show these guys out, I'm walking to his office and I'm thinking, he's lost his mind. He's probably going to fire me or stab me with a letter opener. I don't know what's going to happen. I walk into his office and he's leaning back. He had his feet up on the table and he's smiling. He goes, "Hey, do you like that?" I said, "I don't even know what that was." Like, "Well, are you okay?" And he said, "Listen, these guys, every time they come in here, they're so focused on themselves that they
Yeah.
don't focus on us.
Right.
And I needed them to focus on us. I needed
Yep.
them to understand that there are things they need to pay attention to. And this is the only way I was going to do it."
Hmm.
Now, honestly, I've used that move twice in the past 25 years. But it was only in a situation where I wasn't getting through to the supplier, and I needed them to understand that we were not joking around. This was serious. All of the other times, it's, you know what, help me understand what the issue is.
Yeah,
And if somebody's,
yeah.
yeah, and if somebody starts to get kind of, pushy or aggressive, that's a great time to take a break.
Right.
It's a great time. The power of being able to walk away and regroup is underrated in a negotiation.
Yeah.
People are
Yeah,
just so
it's
anxious to get
intense.
stuff
There's a lot
done.
of pressure on it.
Yeah, but you need to be able to say, you know what? Let's take a break.
Yeah.
Even if things are going well,
Yeah.
walk away,
Exactly. Just take a
right?
breather. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Exactly that. It's a difficult situation really, because because the other thing is using that wisely, because sometimes you it is needed, but it's rare. Because I also find it also sets up the relationship in an odd way, because now that vendor's on tenterhooks thinking, okay, 3 months down the line when we're working together, is this guy going to explode again on me? You know what I mean? It's
yeah. I would never do that with a new vendor relationship. I mean,
yeah.
the 2 times that I did it, it was very long-standing relationships, and
Mm,
the vendor was just obviously basically screwing the customer and not caring,
yeah.
because they just figured, well, this is an annuity. We're just going to get
Yeah.
paid every year. So
Yeah.
needed to kind of snap them back to reality.
And it's a great point actually. A big lesson learned for me, which I realized several years ago, is this is also a call out to ourselves as humans, but also vendors, is don't come in talking about yourself or how great your company is or how great the service is. Start with asking questions around, okay, we're here today to talk about this, this, and this. Ask questions. I'd love it when vendors ask me questions, to your point around the first step around understanding the business problem. Just
Yeah,
saying, okay, as we understand it, it's this and this, this and this. Is that correct? Is there anything else we're missing? Just
yeah,
so we can have a conversation straight away. I hate sitting through 45 minutes of how great the company is, where they're located, how big their team is. It's just,
yeah,
and sometimes, often, in fact, we can cut through negotiations very, very quickly by having the vendor say, and I do this with my discussions as well, is here's what we're here to talk about today. Has anything changed? Is there any new information that's come up? Because there are at least 2 or 3 times where that question was asked, and we've realized that there's a change to the deal, which made the deal happen immediately. We
mm,
cut these 4-hour negotiations down to basically half an hour,
yeah,
because there was something that's changed that actually made it much easier to just go ahead and get done quickly.
yeah.
So it's the lesson learned is always ask questions at the beginning.
Absolutely. And ask questions and listen to what they're saying.
Right. Yes.
Too many times if we start rambling on, I want this and I want that. Well, no, I want the supplier to tell me what they're gonna give me, because maybe they're gonna offer something I hadn't even thought of,
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
don't want to miss out on that.
And that's the other key question as well, which I often ask, and I want vendors to ask, is what else can you offer us? So we're talking about this deal, we're talking about this contract, this service, this solution, but is there anything else that we're not aware of? That, because sometimes they have partnerships, they have relationships with other companies. Maybe,
Hmm.
like you said earlier, maybe there's a new product coming on the market soon that we could be a pilot of, we could trial for free. There's this, we're focusing on this, but what else is going on? Is there anything else that could help our company based on the problems you've asked us about?
Yeah, and that's also a great way to figure out what their BATNA is.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Right.
When you start asking those questions and they say, well, we'd really like to do a press release. Okay, they're looking at market share. So how
Yeah.
can I use that in my negotiation? What can I offer them to help them with their market share that I'm allowed to offer them? And what do I think I can get in return? How can I
Mm,
use that to make the pie bigger? I'm
yeah.
not trying to screw them over. I'm giving them something that they actually need and value. But I'm not just going to give it away for free. There should be something in it for me as well.
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
love it. So just as we start to wind this up, because this is an awesome conversation, and we could keep going for hours on this as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
But so we've covered a lot around, like you said, the BATNA. What do you need next? Making sure that the right team is in the room for negotiation. We covered that 2-table strategy as well, and then we covered your 4-step approach to negotiation, which starts with the preparation, then the value creation, value distribution, and then finishing up with the follow through to actually write out the contract. So is there anything else you wanted just to leave the audience with before we wrap up?
Yeah, the one thing I will say, one of the biggest challenges we have in technology negotiations, um, when we talk about aggressive suppliers, it's these unreasonable timelines
Hmm.
that we get hung with, not just from the supplier, but internally as well. Everybody's pressuring you to get a deal done. We need this contract signed. We need to get the vendor started. One of the best ways to deal with that. So any technology negotiation, in my opinion, revolves around four things, right? It's the price that
Hmm.
you're going to pay, the technical requirements, what you're actually buying, the terms and condition, both legal and business terms, and then the timeline
Yes.
to get it done and go live. Those are the four things, right? There's other stuff, but those are the four key things. And oftentimes what happens is everybody puts time as the most important thing.
Hmm.
So what I like to do when that happens is I'll go to the internal client first and I'll say, okay, you're saying we need to get this deal done by the end of the month. That's the most important thing. Got to get done by the end of the month. You've also said that the budget is this.
Yeah.
Are we willing to pay more than the budget as long as we get the deal done by the end of the month? Most internal clients will say, oh, no, we can't go over budget. Okay, so budget first and then timeline.
Yeah.
Now, if we got the budget and we can get it done by the end of the month, but we have to give up on these legal terms that our lawyers said we have to have, are you going to sign off on it and say we'll bypass the legal terms? Well, no, we can't say no to lawyers. Okay,
Okay.
so it's
That's yeah.
budget, legal, and so you prioritize it that way. And what ends
Yeah.
up happening is the timeline isn't that important.
Yes.
And now you can confidently go and sit in front of the supplier when they say, well, I need it by the end of the month. Anytime a supplier says that to me, they give me a date. I say, okay, tell me what happens on the day after that date.
Hmm.
What's the price? Well, we can't hold the discount. Okay, no problem. Give me two quotes.
Yeah.
One if I get the deal done now, one if I can't get the deal done.
Yeah. Love it.
Over 20 years, I've been asking that question. I have yet to see that second quote.
Right. Yes.
So,
Exactly. Yeah, I love the
yeah.
prioritization as well, and it's something I use on my projects for all the way through, from the negotiation all the way through the project for helping decision, and it's the decision drivers. So, is this decision fixed, as in we have to hit this criteria, or is it flexible?
Yeah.
So, when you talk about budget, do we have a fixed budget or cost of this agreement? Schedule, is it fixed, or can we vary the go live date a little bit? Resources, can we bring in contractors or consulting agencies, or is it just our own team we have to use? The quality, do we, is it the quality more important? It has to meet the functionality, the legal requirements, and you put these on a horizontal scale and start to mark out where these fixed versus flexible ranges. And what you find, to your point, is if everything's a high priority and everything's fixed, then okay, fine, but you've just made this a very high risk project and negotiation because everything has to be fixed and nailed down. So
Yeah.
what's going to give? What, back to your bat now, what can we flex on?
Yeah. Exactly.
So
Exactly.
yeah, I
Yeah.
love it. Awesome. So that's so much insights. Love it, Mohammed. Thank you for sharing that. If the
No, this is
audience
great.
wants to find out more information or contact you, where can they find you?
Yeah. Our website, oneviewnow.com,
Mm,
ONEVIEWNOW.com. I have my training curriculum on there. There's some really good case studies. There's a
mm.
paper I wrote on kind of procurement transformation. Lots of good stuff. And then right from there, you can schedule some time with me. As you can tell, I love to talk. So
Yeah.
I'm happy to give anybody who wants to chat about anything related to procurement and negotiations. I'll give you 30, 60 minutes of my time and we'll talk, no obligation. Because these conversations, I learn as much as I'm trying to teach people or show people. So I enjoy the conversation. You can reach out to me that way.
Awesome. Yeah, I love it. Yeah, I know I highly recommend anyone reaching out to Mohammed because you'll get great insights, even if it's just in that 30 minutes or initial hour of work. So the conversation. Awesome. Well, thanks for your time. And thank you to everyone for joining for another edition of Let's Talk About. And we'll see you in the next episode. Bye for now.
Thanks.
See
Bye.
ya.